I'm pretty sure that most of my listeners have heard of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It was pretty famous in Hollywood, I think in the 1930s, with some films that may have not been too accurate in terms of what an RCMP officer was about. I seem to recall some guy crooning to some lovely young women. But the RCMP is, in fact, Canada's national police force. It dates back to 1873 in various manifestations, and it has the, responsibility in my country of being both a national police force as well as the force of jurisdiction in 8 of the 10 provinces and the 3 territories, and through an arrangement called contract policing, is actually a municipal police force in many parts of Canada as well. So despite the fact the RCMP is a Canadian police force, it also has had a fairly significant presence abroad. The RCMP is well regarded by many nations, and many nations turn to the RCMP for assistance in training and with doing their own law enforcement in their own countries. And so I thought I would explore this element today, and I have the great pleasure of welcoming to the podcast a friend of mine, Bill Malone, who spent 26 years with the RCMP, and more interestingly, at least for this podcast, is he spent some time in Afghanistan with the RCMP and actually wrote a book about his experiences called Cops in Kabul, a Newfoundland peacekeeper in Afghanistan. So Bill, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Phil. It's great to be here.
Simple question first, Bill. How does a young man from, as we call it, the Rock, Newfoundland, end up in the RCMP in the first place?
Well, it was a bit of a circuitous route to get here. I initially, when I was going to university, I had no intentions of becoming a police officer. And after I completed my studies at St. FX, I was speaking to a couple of friends of my father who were RCMP officers, and they had always kind of been, talking to me and about a career in the force and all the interesting things that I'd get to do. So I started looking at it in earnest, and anyway, I decided to throw my name in the hat. And I didn't tell my parents at the time, which is kind of a funny story, because I came home one day from work, and my mom was standing on the front step, and she was such a kind-hearted soul, never got angry, and she had this very stern look on her face. And yeah, and I'm thinking, oh, there's something going on. And when I got out of the car, she looked at me and she said, I just got a call from the RCMP. They want you to call them as soon as possible.
And this can't end well, Bill. This can't end well.
well, the funny thing was, I said to her, oh, okay, thanks, Mom. And I just walked right by her. And, she followed me right in the house. And her biggest concern was that I had done something terribly wrong. But when I told her that I had applied for the RCMP, she had this look on her face like, why would you do that? You just got a business degree. So anyway, it was it all turned out well, because she became probably my most ardent supporter at the end of the day when I got in.
Oh, that's such a great story, Bill. Now, you said you went to SFX. So for my listeners, that's St. Francis Xavier University. It is in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. So you would have gone to Depot, which was of course, the training headquarters in Regina, in Saskatchewan. Right. What was your early career like in the RCMP, Bill, before you went on your international foray?
Well, I was very, very fortunate. I had the opportunity. I was presented with the opportunity when I first got recruited into the RCMP to take French language training. And after taking an aptitude test, I was sent off to Montreal for a period of 8 months to learn French. And then upon completion of that, I was sent to Depot to do my training from there. But I remember as we got closer to the end of our training and we went through our staffing interviews, the staffing officer of the day decided that he was going to interview me in French. And I guess my French, I guess my French was proficient enough at the time that they sent me to northern New Brunswick.
Okay. Again, for my listeners who don't know Canada very well, New Brunswick is an eastern Atlantic province, one of the 4 Atlantic provinces in Canada. And the northern, pretty well third to a half, Bill, is largely Francophone?
Yes, there's quite a Francophone population there. The vast majority are bilingual. And for all the listeners out there, New Brunswick is the only official bilingual province. So yeah, no,
That's true.
it was
That's true.
it was. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in New Brunswick. Great people, great opportunities.
Now, I can assume, Bill, that as a relatively new recruit rather, who's assigned to your first duty in northern New Brunswick, you would have been responsible for what they call, it's not a great word, but general policing duties. Is that an accurate reflection of what you did at first?
Yes, that's correct. General duty, detachment duties. So out on patrol, dealing
Hmm.
with day to day occurrences, much like you would see in any big cities or small towns.
Okay. Well, your life took a bit of a change, Bill. In 2011, you ended up going to Kabul, Afghanistan, as part of the RCMP, and you were there as you were actually there. You were put in command of the Canadian police, who were part of the NATO training mission for Afghan police officers. How in the world did you end up in Afghanistan? What was that process like? First of all, were you approached? Did you consider it? How does a guy who's doing general police duties in New Brunswick, or wherever you were at the time, end up being in Afghanistan, half a world away?
So, following 9/11, my whole career took a different trajectory from what I was doing. I was involved in money laundering investigations at the time in New Brunswick, and I got a call to go to Ottawa to help set up with a bunch of my colleagues from across the country to start the first terrorist financing investigative unit. So I left New Brunswick, ended up in Ottawa. And from there, being involved in international policing and counterterrorism, I had a real interest in that. So over the course of a number of years, and as I moved up through the ranks in different positions, I was presented with an opportunity to go as the deputy commander of the Canadian police contingent to Afghanistan in 2011, 2012. So, I thought it would be a very interesting thing to do, a very challenging environment for sure. But that's essentially how I ended up going to Afghanistan. I put my name in the hat and I ended up being selected to go.
You said that Afghanistan would have been a very challenging position. That must be the most understated thing I've heard in a long time, Bill. How did your family and colleagues view this when you put your name in the hat and were selected and were going to be sent off to Afghanistan, which, by 2011, the Taliban is still very, very strong. I don't think we had the Islamic State affiliate in Afghanistan at that point, but I report on Afghanistan on a daily basis when it comes to terrorism. It hasn't slowed down over the years. Were your friends and family worried about you when you went to Afghanistan?
To say they were worried would be an understatement, Phil. My daughters at the time, they were younger, of course, and they kind of had an idea as to where I was going, but I don't know that they truly appreciated the danger. Um, my wife was she was quite concerned, of course, and my poor mother, God rest her soul, she was beside herself, and I said to her before I left, I said, "Look, Mom, don't watch the news. Please don't watch the news." And of course, by saying that, she watched the news, right?
Just watch the news, exactly.
So yeah, it was stressful on her, and that's one of the things that I regret, in the fact that it was stressful on her. But I did call her frequently from there, and just to reassure her and all my family and friends that everything was okay, because there were times, Phil, and when we would have attacks in Afghanistan, and I was situated in
Mhm.
Kabul, we wouldn't even know about it. It's
Yeah,
much like living in Canada and something happens in Saskatchewan, right? You might not
yeah,
immediately hear about it, but of course the phone's ringing off the hook from Ottawa, making sure that
yeah.
everybody's okay in that, and that was a good thing, that everybody was always concerned about our safety while we were there.
Mhm. So you were stationed in Kabul, so the capital of Afghanistan, but in a not a great neighborhood. I know that, again, when I follow Afghan news on a daily basis, especially lately, it seems the Taliban have been stepping up their attacks in Kabul with mortar attacks and magnetic IEDs, all kinds of things. How did you feel in terms of your own personal safety, Bill, when you were there? I mean, obviously you're a police officer, you're trained, you're there with your fellow Canadians, you're there probably with other multinationals and the Afghans. Did you, when you woke up every morning while you're in Kabul, were you concerned for your own personal safety?
There was always a concern for your personal safety. I mean, you couldn't really take any days off when you were there,
Mhm.
given the level of threat. And some days, I mean, the threat levels were to the point where you were completely locked down. But
Wow.
to go and operate in an environment like that, if you're going to be paralyzed by fear, it's not the place to be, and that's okay because it's
Right.
not for everybody, right? And I don't, we
Mhm.
we had a couple of folks that ended up coming back home for various reasons, and that's okay. And in my view, to make a decision to leave the mission is commendable because you realize that you're beyond your limits and beyond your comfort
Right.
level. But in answering to your question, Phil, um, you weren't fearful, but you were certainly concerned for your safety. So every time you went outside the wire,
Mhm.
you were always looking around and making
Yeah.
sure, head on a swivel sort of thing, right? When you were driving through traffic and whatnot.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned, not being too critical of those who tried it and couldn't cut it. I remember before I started university, I spent a summer up in northern Ontario, just south of Moosonee, which is right on James Bay, and I was at a camp in the middle of the bush, and of course we were there during black fly season, and we had this is all high school students at the time. We were all finishing high school, and one of my mates, my friends, he was up there, and he basically he kind of lost it because the black flies were so bad that they basically swarm in clouds around you. For anybody who hasn't been to central or northern Ontario parts of Canada when black fly season's out, it's not a good time to visit Canada.
Mm.
And this poor guy, we had to send him back on the train. He couldn't manage. So I don't think it's necessarily a black mark against you if you can't manage a situation that's dangerous. So Bill, you've written this book, Cops in Kabul. Um, which I'm going to recommend. I'm going to put a link to it on the website. This is an unfair question to ask you. I mean, I'm sure you have a gazillion experiences from your time in Afghanistan. If you were to summarize what it was like working as an RCMP officer, working with your Afghan colleagues, doing some training, doing some patrols, whatever it is that you were doing, how would you summarize the time you spent in Afghanistan, Bill?
Uh, well, I think that we did a lot of very good things there. They might be hard for people to find, but in my book itself, I mentioned a number of different things that some of my colleagues did while they were there, and especially given the environment. I mean, nothing was easy, and you always
Mhm.
had different organizations that seemed to be working at cross purposes to one another. Um, but one of the things there was a young lady a sergeant from the Montreal City Police, who set up a program to prevent the underage recruitment of boys into the Afghan National Police and the military because they were being
Oh
abused.
wow.
Yeah. So that, to me, that I consider that one of the most impressive
Mhm.
accomplishments during my time there. Now, from my perspective, we were just one contingent there in during a 12-month period. Um, there was lots of other police officers that were there as well over the course of the entire Afghan mission, and our mission was completely different from what my colleagues went through down in Kandahar. I mean,
Of course.
they were out doing presence patrols with the military, and I mean,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
extremely dangerous work. And I don't know
Mhm.
that a lot of people know about some of the work that they did down there. So uh,
Mhm.
I've spoken to a number of my colleagues that served in Afghanistan, and I said, look, I think it's important that people know the type of work that you were doing there, because there's a gap in history there. I think there's a gap in policing
Yeah.
history in Afghanistan. Everybody knows, about the military contribution and all the,
Mhm.
incredible work that they did and sacrifices that were made, but very few people know about the policing contribution that was made by Canadian police officers. And not only the RCMP, there was a number of municipal forces from right across the country and provincial police forces that
Mm.
participated in the mission.
Oh, so it wasn't just the RCMP. It was more of a sort of a sort of all hands on deck, provincial and municipal forces that were part of the mission as well. Then.
That's correct, because the Canadian policing agreement, which governed our actions in Afghanistan, that was to be applied to all police forces who decided to participate in the mission.
Okay.
So, as an example, of course, you had the RCMP there, the Ontario Provincial Police, the
Hmm.
Montreal City Police. You had Halifax. You had
Oh,
people from Saskatoon, Calgary, Toronto Metro had a big
oh, wow.
presence. Yeah, like, so we had folks. We had folks from all across the country, which was great. I mean, because everybody brings a significant level of
Mm.
expertise. Um, and you had people there who were, fairly young in service, 5 to 7 to 10 years.
Hmm.
And then you had other people with 30 plus years service. So it was,
Right.
there was a lot of good work done by a lot of folks.
I had no idea, Bill, that it was such a pan-Canadian effort. I'm really glad you pointed that out. You mentioned that, of course, we here in Canada hear an awful lot about the military mission in Afghanistan. Of course, Canada was one of the first NATO partners to join the Americans after the events of 9/11, and we were there for, well over a decade. And in fact, we got Kandahar, which, as you said, was one of the most dangerous parts in Afghanistan. I believe, I don't know what the exact death total, but it's over 150 Canadian soldiers died in Afghanistan during that time. You also pointed out that we don't know a lot about the police presence in Afghanistan. What message do you want to give to my listeners, many of whom are Canadian, probably had no idea that Canada did send police officers such as yourselves and your colleagues to Afghanistan to engage in a very, very dangerous, challenging mission. What do you want them to know about that? If you could summarize that, in a fairly brief fashion, what are the essential parts that Canadians should grasp and take home about the Canadian police mission in Afghanistan?
Well, again, excuse me, it was a very, very challenging environment, and for me personally, it was, not only challenging, but it was probably one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in my career. And I think that if you were to speak to any of the Canadian police officers that served over there, they would probably echo the same sentiment. In terms of messages, um, places like Afghanistan, there are lots of very fine and good people that live in that country that are
Mm.
all trying to go about their business, just live their lives, just have their
Mhm.
their families grow. And by way of example, Phil, I'll tell you, there was a conversation that I had with a young Afghan gentleman who worked at the embassy. He was married, he had three little boys, and he was driving me somewhere in Kabul to a meeting one day, and this was 2 or 3 months after I'd been there. And I said to him, I said, "What do you think of all this? What do you think of us being here?" Just to get his take on things. And he said, "Look, you know, I know that you have come here to help us. I know that you have come here to at great risk to you and being away from your families. But," he said, "all I want to do is work, raise my boys, have them go to school, and just live in peace." And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, "You know what? You're no different than any other dad anywhere
Yeah,
else in the world,
yeah.
right?" And I think that
So true.
and
So
I think
true.
that people have to understand that we're more alike than we are different, right?
That's a wonderful message, Bill. I think that a lot of us see, what's happening, whether it's Afghanistan or Somalia, and some of us will say, "Oh, those poor people." Others will say, "Well, what do I care? It's half a world away." Or maybe they made their own problems. Maybe, they shouldn't have invited the Taliban in, or maybe the Somalis shouldn't have invited Al Shabaab in, and maybe they own some responsibility for how bad the situation has gotten. But you raise a very, very good point, and that's people are people. Like you said, he's just a young dad. He's got three kids. He's trying to raise them in the same way that you raise your children, the same way that I raise my children, and just trying to make your way through in life. It's really important, I think, for us to realize that we may not be able to understand it to the same extent you did, because of course you were there. But I think if we try to reduce this to the human level, we can gain a little more sympathy for people that have just suffered terribly for the better part of two generations now, ever since the Soviets invaded in 1979.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Phil. I mean, anyone who looks at the history of Afghanistan will see. I mean, going back hundreds of years, back to Alexander the Great,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
there's always been conflict in that country, and you can almost see it in the faces of the people that live there, how uh, they're battle weary. You know,
mm,
and not knowing from one day to the next, if I go out and go to the market, could that be
yeah,
my last day, because I'm gonna, a car bomb is gonna go off, or whatever. But it's and you have so many different influences there, as in terms of, you look around that neighborhood and you have people there that I used to. Afghanistan was kind of like the playing field for the teams that would come in from, regionally from Pakistan and from
yeah,
Iran and from
yeah,
other places. They'd come and they'd fight it out there, and then they'd all go back home, regroup, and fill the war chest again, and come back at it
yeah,
again. You know,
yeah. And
so
then the poor Afghan people pay the price, kind of thing. I mean, and on the other hand, it's not for nothing that Afghanistan has long been called the graveyard of empires. I mean, going, as you say, back to Alexander.
right,
Bill, as you look back now, so now we're in early 2021. You were there a decade ago. I don't know how closely you follow what's happening in
yeah,
Afghanistan. Um, Things aren't good.
no,
The Trump presidency wanted to get out of Afghanistan, and that I understand the rationale and the thinking behind it. Americans have been there for 20 years. It is sometimes hard to see what progress has been made, even if some, in fact, has been achieved. And yet, I'm reporting at least an attack, usually three or four attacks a day in Afghanistan, including in Kabul, in the capital. Magnetic IEDs attached to cars, mortars. The Taliban engaged with Afghan National Army or police with guns. When you look back now, Bill, and you sort of project into what things are like now, how do you feel about this? Is there a sense of disappointment? Is there a sense of, gee, we didn't really accomplish very much, did we? Because the situation is as bad, if not worse now. Is there a sense of, I don't know, despair, or do you still remain kind of positive about your experience there?
in terms of our experience and what we, collectively did there, I think we did the best we could with what we had in the time that we had. As far as what things look like today, it's frustrating, and it saddens me that things have appeared to have gotten somewhat worse. Um, and there's no way there's not enough bombs and bullets in the world to solve the problems that are there. And from
Yeah.
my perspective, continually taking that approach is not the correct approach. And uh, from the way I see it is, social development, education,
Mhm.
political engagement. Those are the things that are going to solve those problems, if ever. But
Mhm.
you're certainly not going to shoot your way out of it.
So, last question, Bill. Are you cautiously optimistic, partly pessimistic? I mean, where do you stand now, knowing what you saw, what you experienced, and what seems to be happening today? As I said, it'd be pretty hard to conclude otherwise that the violence is going to continue in Afghanistan, depending on what the Americans do or do not do under Joe Biden. Where do you stand as of February of 2021, Bill?
Well, I've considered myself to always to be an optimist. So, I would like to think that things will improve, albeit very, very slowly. I think it comes down to when you have the right people in the right places,
Mm,
amazing things can happen. So, if you've got the right people at the negotiating table, and people are
mm.
willing to listen, I think anything's possible. So, in answer to your question, Phil, I'm cautiously optimistic.
I'm like you, Bill. I'm an optimist at heart, even if I do immerse myself in terrorism writing and terrorism reporting every day, which is depressing sometimes. I think we have to definitely look at the brighter side of the rainbow on this one. Bill, I want to thank you so much, not just for taking the time today to talk to me, but for your service to Canada, in the RCMP, your time as a police officer, your dedication to the Afghan people. Thank you very much, and I wish you well going forward.
Thank you, Phil. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So that was Bill Malone. His book is Cops in Kabul, a Newfoundland peacekeeper in Afghanistan. I'll put a link to it on my website. I can't wait to read my copy, and I sincerely hope you get a copy as well. So, what do you think of what Bill Malone had to say about police forces in Afghanistan and international involvement, not just from the military, but policing perspective? Love to hear what you think. You can reach me on email, borealisrisk@gmail.com, or on Twitter @BorealisSaves. You also find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. If you like the content, want to get more, simply go to the website, borealisthreatandrisk.com, hit the subscribe button. For free of charge, you get a daily digest, podcasts like these, all the blogs, the media, and also you'll find a link to my newest book, The Peaceable Kingdom, The History of Terrorism in Canada from Confederation to the Present. There's a link there where you can order your own copy. It's only $25 Canadian plus $5 shipping and handling. It's a story of terrorism in Canada as seen through the eyes of the RCMP and CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I think you'll find it interesting. I'll talk to you again soon. Until then, stay safe.